Good evening, everybody. We'll start with
Sir, good evening,
today's
sir.
session. So, dear friends, we are discussing regarding the chronic case taking and few more qualities of the homeopathic physician in certain cases, of certain difficult cases where the patient is not giving you details. In such types of cases, certain characteristics or qualities the homeopathic physician should have, and those are mentioned by Hahnemann in the aphorism number 98. So a special, well, demands of special circumspection, the tact, the knowledge of human nature, the caution in conducting the inquiry, and patience in an eminent degree. These are the few more qualities one should have and one should develop while dealing with such chronic cases. That's what he has explained in the aphorism number 98. So we are discussing regarding this chronic case taking and many aspects, many views regarding the chronic case taking. Hahnemann have tried by giving multiple examples of it, as well as considering all the pros and cons regarding the chronic case taking. Let us go ahead with the aphorism number 99, what he wants to explain. Specifically, when you deal with the acutes, what is the difference between acute and chronic? That he wants to define over there in the aphorism number 99. On the whole, the investigation of acute diseases or of such as have existed but a short time is much the easiest for the physician, because all the phenomena and deviations from the health that has been but recently lost are still fresh in the memory of the patient, and his friends still continue to be novel and striking. So when you deal with the acutes, things are rather simple. It is too easy to reach to the simillimum because you get the characteristic features. The symptoms which are present inside the human being, they are of a recent character. So they are novel, they are of recent origin. And second important thing, they are more striking. And because of which it is fresh in the patient's mind. Patient never forgets about them. And it is easy to get for the homeopath. So in acutes, you don't require so much of things, the qualities or all those things which you definitely require in case of acutes. The physician certainly requires to know everything in such cases also, but he has much less to inquire into. So here everything comes from the patient himself. Here very few questions are necessary to ask when you deal with the acutes, because it comes automatically. It reflects very easily in case of such types of patient, and that's why the inquiry questions are very less in acute cases, whereas there is much detailed inquiry is required in chronic. They are for the most part spontaneously detailed to him. So whatever the information is there is spontaneously explained by the patient. And this is true. The patient comes to you and they details the symptom very easily, and you can reach to the remedy very easily. Patient comes and patient tells you, Doctor, yesterday I was not having any problem, and yesterday evening I went to some place 30-40 kilometers on two-wheeler. I got draft of air. There was a tremendous cold and draft of air, and that affected me. And since morning, I'm having fever. I'm having the dryness. I'm literally affected because of it. I'm having body ache, and I'm having running coryza and everything. So it has affected me so fast. He gives you all details, and then it becomes rather simple. Here, there is no need to ask how it has started, or patient himself, just you ask what's your problem, and that's all. The patient details the problem. And you get the remedy very easily because the characteristics are mentioned. In acute, the characteristics are very easy. The symptoms which characterizes individuals are the characteristics. They are of peculiar, queer, rare, strange, striking. All those symptoms are there. And those are very easily, spontaneously explained by the patient, where inquiry is not needed. So patient comes in such an acute panic state, and he explains, Doctor, do something very fast, otherwise I will die. If he explains this, that's all. Whether the patient is having the fever, patient is having the body ache, patient is having the toothache, whether patient is having heart attack, it doesn't matter. He details his state. He's asking, give me aconite, give me aconite. That's all. He's explaining you because he is explaining you the striking nature of his disease. And it is too simple. Patient comes to you with severe acute toothache and he explains that, doctor, this pain is there right from here, it goes to the eyes, and I cannot even chew something, and it's so painful. You must think that toothache associated with the pain in eyes, pain in face on the same side is a plantago. You can very easily, it enters into the ear and patient details you. And if patient details all those things, it becomes rather simple. Your task becomes simple to find it out a remedy because you get the striking features, which is not so with the chronic. If the patient is having chronic toothache since last 2 years and he has caries over there, then it's not too easy to reach to the remedy because already the pathology has taken place. And then you have to think about what miasm is there, whether it is the destruction, where exactly the destruction is there, whether it is internal destruction, whether it is the superficial destruction. All things you have to take into consideration when you deal with the chronic pathology. But with acutes, it's not so. With acutes, it's too easy. So if a patient comes to you with such acute presentations, it is rather simple. Then your task becomes simple. And this is the difference between the acute case taking and chronic case taking. In fact, it is acute detailing which you get very easily. The spontaneous case happens to be there in acutes as compared to the chronic, in which you have to ask many more questions to the patient. So what he explains over there, the acute diseases, when you are dealing with many things you get spontaneously, which is not possible in cases of chronics. So comparison between acute and chronic, he tried to explain over there in this aphorism number 99, and then he turns towards the very important aspect. It's a hot issue nowadays, and since last 3-4 years, because we are going through an epidemic disorder. So how should be your approach in epidemic diseases? That's what have been explained in the aphorism number 100. If you have opened your books, just write around the aphorism number 99, case taking in acute diseases, and around about the 100 aphorism, epidemic case taking in epidemic and sporadic diseases. So now we'll turn towards the aphorism number 100. In investigating the totality of the symptoms of epidemic and sporadic diseases, it is quite immaterial whether or not something similar has ever appeared in the world before under the same or any other name. What he is saying is very important. He says that in investigating the totality of the symptoms of epidemic and sporadic diseases, it is quite immaterial. Immaterial means here it doesn't have lot of meaning, shullak, mahatva naslela, which doesn't have so much of importance. It is quite immaterial whether or not something similar has ever appeared in the world before the same or any other name. Because we never deal with the name of the epidemic disease. We deal with the individuality, whatever it may be. Because when we treat the COVID-19, we have to approach with the same way as we approach to any other patient. It is not different. It is not something else. And that's why your approach always remains to be the same. So if there are 10 patients of COVID-19, everyone's remedy again found to be different, even though there might be a few symptoms which are common to them. But those common are not important. Here you have to find it out a remedy for that individual. So everyone presents it in a different manner, and you have to take into consideration that patient specifically, not his disease. So this is too important to what he wants to explain over there. The novelty and peculiarity of the disease. Novelty means navinya, newness. The novelty and or peculiarity of disease of that kind makes no difference either in mode of examining or of treating it, as physician must anyway regard the pure picture of every prevailing disease as if it were something new and unknown, and investigate it thoroughly for itself if he desires to practice medicine in a real and radical manner, never substituting conjecture for all actual observation. Conjecture म्हणजे तर्क, तर्कावर आधारलेलं, which is based upon the speculation. Never substituting conjecture for actual observation, never taking for granted that the case of disease before him is already wholly or partially known, but always carefully examining it in all its phases. And this mode of procedure is all the more requisite in such cases, as a careful examination will show that every prevailing disease is, in many respects, a phenomenon of unique character, differing vastly from all previous epidemics, to which certain names have been falsely applied, with the exception of those epidemics resulting from contagious principles that always remain the same, such as smallpox, measles, etc. So what he is explaining? He is explaining that whether you deal with the acutes, whether you deal with the sporadics, epidemics, or endemics, or with the individual diseases, any variety of acute diseases, your approach never changes. Your approach is to find it out what is the totality of the symptom. It is not the same remedy which will be useful for each and every patient in such types of cases. Not at all. You cannot prescribe the same remedy. Many homeopaths have done wrong thing during the COVID. They have prescribed arsenic album to each and every patient. And even some allopaths, they have used the arsenic album to each and every patient of COVID-19. Arsenic was a preventive. It was preventive. It was genus epidemicus. Genus epidemicus is not a curative remedy. Genus epidemicus is the remedy for the purpose of prevention. No one understood the concept of genus epidemicus. And that's why there was a problem. So once genus is found it out, that you can give to the healthy persons in order to prevent the attack of disease, or even though the person suffers from the attack, he doesn't have that much of strong affection because he has already taken that dose. But that remedy is not the curative remedy of the patient. And that mistake have been done by many people during the COVID-19 epidemic. In fact, many allopaths, they consider they have become homeopaths and they have used the arsenic album. Many people, they have understood that they know the homeopathy, and that's why they have prepared arsenic in a big pots, and they have given it, and the result was very bad. So actually, when you deal with the epidemic cases, when you deal with individual cases, when you deal with the sporadic cases, when you deal with the endemic cases, your approach is symptom similarity. Your approach is take into consideration the totality of the patient, and accordingly you find it out whatever the remedy of the patient is there. So your approach never changes. For each and every patient, you have to find it out, every detail, and you have to approach accordingly. So your remedy depends on individual characteristics and not on the disease names. And that's why Hahnemann says in the first line only, it is of an immaterial origin. It doesn't have a meaning to label that disease with certain name, because labeling creates a prejudiced mind. Once you consider you are treating the COVID, the some future always strikes your mind very easily. And you run behind those features instead of finding it out what is the characteristic with which the patient is approaching. And this one should not do. And that's why Hahnemann have spent one aphorism in order to explain that your approach remains one and same, whether you treat the individual disease of individual variety of acute disease, or a sporadic variety of acute disease, or epidemic and endemic disease of variety of acute disease. Your approach is individualistic and depends upon the totality of the symptoms. So right over there in the aphorism number 100, approach in every variety of acute disease remains to be the same. That is individualistic examination of the patient. So there is no separate way, there is no separate method to deal with the epidemic diseases as a curative. Is it clear with everyone? So that we can start with 101. Any query, any question regarding it? Okay, we will start with the next aphorism. Aphorism number 101. See what he wants to explain over there. It may easily happen that in the first case of an epidemic disease that presents itself to the physician's notice, he does not at once obtain knowledge of its complete picture, as it is only by close observation of several cases of every such collective disease that he can become conversant with totality of its signs and symptoms. So what he's explaining, then he starts explaining how to deal with the epidemics. In order to find it out of genus epidemicus, a remedy for the purpose of prevention of disorder in cases of that epidemic, then first case of the epidemic, when you treat, it never gives you complete picture of that epidemic disease. You have to at least treat hundreds of patients of the COVID. Then you get a common totality of the COVID-19. That totality is of a COVID-19 with which you have to find it out a remedy for COVID-19 as a preventive remedy called to be a genus epidemicus. It is not the individual remedy of that patient of COVID-19. It is the remedy for the COVID-19 disease and used as a for the preventive purpose, not for the curative purpose. So always keep it in your mind. Genus epidemicus always remains to be a preventive remedy for the epidemic disorder, but not the curative remedy. And then what he says, the carefully observing physician can, however, from the examination of even the first and second patients, often arrive so nearly at a knowledge of the true state as to have in his mind a characteristic portrait of it, and even to succeed in finding a suitable homeopathically adapted remedy for it. So once you go on finding it out, many patients, first patient, the second patient, third patient, and you grab the totality. Yes, this is common in those patients. So when disease was started in 2020, early cases of the epidemics, they have a common presentation. They used to get fever associated with the body ache, associated with the cough, associated with expectoration and breathlessness. That was typical. Patient was going in having a typical presentation associated sometimes with GI disturbances, and which was at the same time which was showing a toxic appearance. The patient was having thirst. Patient was remains to be in a thirst stage, and patient was becoming chilly, and because of which arsenic found to be very close to those presentation. But that arsenic is the remedy of that epidemic, not the remedy of that specific patient. For every specific patient, there was found to be a different remedy. I have treated many cases, and we have individualized the cases. For every case, what is the characteristic with which patient has approached, that we used to take into consideration. So sometimes we require anti-Mars, sometimes we require anti-mTAT, sometimes we require even bryonia, sometimes we require belladonna. It varies from individual to individual with their presentations according to the characteristic which the patient has shown, and because we have to utilize the remedy for that patient. And first, I have declared it. My first Facebook post was there. My suggestion for the genus epidemicus was arsenic album at that time, depending on this totality. So that remedy we have used in ample cases as a preventive for the rest of the human being. and it has worked beautifully. Those who have suffered even after taking the arsenic album have little presentation of the COVID-19. And that is the use of using the genus epidemicus in such types of cases. So approach when you deal with the epidemic diseases remains to be the same, only to find it out the genus epidemicus. The approach is finding it out totality of the whole epidemic by examining many cases of the epidemic disorder. So this aphorism is dealt with the approach in epidemic and sporadic diseases. In order to treat, the approach is individualistic. In order to prevent, to find it out many more cases of that and find it out a remedy in order to prevent that disorder. And then we have to turn towards the another aphorism, the aphorism number 102. How to approach to find it out genus epidemicus. In the course of writing down the symptoms of several cases of this kind, the sketch of the disease picture becomes ever more and more complete, not more spun out and verbose. Spun out means not forming conclusion. Spun out. And verbose म्हणजे एखादी गोष्ट पाल्ल्या लावून सांगणे. To explain it in detail. But more significant, more characteristic, and including more of the peculiarities of this collective disease. On the one hand, the general symptoms, that is, example, loss of appetite, sleeplessness, etc., becomes precisely defined as to their peculiarities. And on the other, the more marked and special symptoms, which are peculiar to but few diseases and of rarer occurrence, at least in the same combination, becomes prominent and constitute what is characteristic of this malady. All those affected with disease prevailing at a given time have certainly contracted it from one and the same source, and hence are suffering from the same disease. But the whole extent of such an epidemic disease and the totality of its symptoms, the knowledge whereof which is essential for enabling us to choose the most suitable homeopathic remedy for this array of symptoms, is obtained by complete survey of the morbid picture, cannot be learned from one single patient, but is only be perfectly deduced, that is abstracted. Deduced means to come to the conclusion. Abstracted and ascertained from the sufferings of several patients of different constitution. So what he is giving, he is explaining you the how to approach in cases of epidemic diseases to find it out a genus epidemicus. It is not a single patient will going to denote you a genus epidemicus. When you approach many cases of the epidemics, and then your totality of that epidemic becomes more and more firm. You get ample cases and you get clear picture of it, and then that totality denotes certain remedy, and that becomes a remedy for that specific epidemic. The same was happened when there was a chikungunya epidemic. In 2006 or 2007, there was chikungunya epidemic, and many people were suffering from chikungunya at that time. And literally, we have worked very, very nicely in those types of cases at that time. And I found that Rustox was a wonderful remedy we have prescribed as a genus epidemicus for the case. And it worked beautifully in many cases. And it was worked out on the presentation of that totality of that specific epidemic. Now, any patient they were not able to rise up. They used to suffer a lot, and all joints were stiffened, and it was rather gets aggravated whenever they used to sit in one place. And then after little bit force, when they starts walking, they used to feel better. Typical Rustox modality was there throughout that epidemic of chikungunya. And that's why we choose the Rustox, and we have given Rustox to many families in Sangamner. So that's the approach to find it out the genus epidemicus, and after examining many cases, it is possible to reach to the remedy. So this is what he wants to explain over there, that the approach is rather different when you deal with the genus epidemicus, and approach is rather different when you deal with the individual case of the epidemic disease. Individual case of epidemic disease, you have to deal the same way as you deal with any other acute disease. But when you have to find it out, a preventive remedy for that epidemic, the approach is always after examining many cases of that epidemic with which you form a totality and with which you can approach with that case as a preventive remedy. There is one short footnote. We'll finish that footnote and we'll stop today. There is a footnote. The physician who has already, in the first cases, been able to choose a remedy approximating to the homeopathic specific will, from the subsequent cases, be enabled either to verify the suitableness of medicine chooser and to discover most appropriate homeopathic remedy. What happens once you find it out one remedy for that specific patient? Another patient, you find it out another remedy. And then you deal with such types of cases. But sometimes your mind becomes preoccupied. It should not happen. If it becomes preoccupied with the certain totality of the symptom and you casually ask those symptoms with the patient, then what happens generally? You miss the case. That's why it is not the same remedy with which you have to approach while dealing with the individual case, but you have to find it out most appropriate remedy to that patient. So every patient who has presented during an epidemic, you have to find it out a remedy according to that patient. In between, there was one more epidemic was there, that was of a swine flu. And people were afraid of that swine flu because it was affecting many peoples and many deaths were recorded at that time, and they were all of a sudden affecting it was again a pneumonitis affecting the patient, and rather patient was becoming breathless. At that time also, I have chosen the same remedy as a remedy for that epidemic, and I have chosen the arsenic album as the preventive remedy. I have sent many letters even to the CCH. I have sent letters to the WHO, and later on it was declared that arsenic was the genus epidemicus for that swine flu at that time. So this you have to work on the basis of observing many cases of that, and then you can reach to the genus epidemic. So approach is rather different when you deal with the patients of the epidemic. An approach is rather different when you have to use the remedy for the healthy persons as a preventive remedy in the form of genus epidemic. And so these four aphorisms, right from the aphorism number 100 to 102, all those deals with the epidemic approach in epidemic and sporadic diseases, and aphorism number 99 deals with the acute diseases, how to approach in acute diseases. So today we have started with the 99, aphorism number 99 to the aphorism number 2, including the footnote, homeopathic approach in acute diseases. That's what we have learned. So that's all for today's session. One thing, tomorrow we'll have a session at 5:30, exactly at 5:30, because I have some other appointment at 6 o'clock. We'll have a short session tomorrow. And I think tomorrow we'll finish, if it is possible. No, it is not possible. Yes, only two aphorisms are remaining from this session. We'll finish that 103 and 104 aphorisms in tomorrow's session, and we'll finish the case taking in tomorrow's session. So tomorrow be there at 5:30 instead of 6 o'clock, and we'll have half an hour session tomorrow. Any questions, any queries are there, we'll have, otherwise we'll stop. Any questions, queries? So thank you everyone. We'll meet tomorrow at the 5:30. Be there at 5:30 and we'll have a session. Okay. So thank you everyone for attending session, and after a gap of few days,
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Sir, there is one query. While treating acute, when we prescribe first medicine, then for second choice, sir, is it necessary to take it from that chart from Kent? Boric remedy that follows well or complementary remedy?
No, first
Is
important.
it compulsory or?
No. It is not compulsory. When if you find it out, it is an acute episode of a chronic disease. If a patient is having it since a long time, but it is an acute episode, and then you have to deal with the chronic disease later on, then definitely the remedy relationship makes a difference. But after an acute, one important thing that I will guide you, when you treat acute disease as an acute disorder, and to finish that, after a settlement of the patient, give a one dose of antisoric remedies, basically the sulfur. And Kent has mentioned, even in his Materia Medica, lectures on Materia Medica, that sulfur should be given after each and every acute disease is finished. The pathological explanation I can give you, because that was worked out by me, why it is necessary to give the sulfur in such types of cases. That is my study. It is not given in the book. Kent has tried it his level best to explain it in his own way, but if you correlate with the pathology, then you can find it out. But if it is a purely acute, you give the sulfur as a uh, to complete the case, sulfur as a remedy. But if you are dealing with the chronics and it is an acute episode of a chronic, then definitely remedy relationship helps you.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Karuna, I never understand your question. In which potency? Sulfur is basically, it depends upon the susceptibility of the patient. You can give for 30 200, depends how much is the susceptibility of that patient. Judge the susceptibility and accordingly use. But it should not be repeated. It should be only one dose. Okay. So thank you being there. We'll meet tomorrow at 5:30. Thanks a lot.